No one has ever made you feel this seen. That is exactly the problem. Think about the moment it started. The texts that came too fast to be normal. The compliments that felt like they had been written just for you. The feeling that finally, after years of being overlooked, someone truly understood who you are. It felt like fate. But what if that feeling was never an accident? What if it was built, engineered, designed to bypass every defense you didn't even know you had? By the end of this, you will understand why the most intense, most intoxicating connection of your life might have been the most dangerous thing that ever happened to you. We live in a culture obsessed with finding the one, the person who completes us. Dating apps promise instant connection. Movies tell us that overwhelming, all-consuming love is proof that something is real. Social media is filled with couples whose affection looks larger than life. So when someone comes along who seems to love you harder, faster, and more completely than anyone ever has, your brain does not raise an alarm. It lights up like it found exactly what it was searching for. Psychology researchers have a name for this experience. They call it love bombing, and it is one of the most effective psychological tools ever used to gain control over another human being. This is not about every passionate relationship turning dangerous. Most do not. But understanding this pattern matters because in a world of instant connection, swipe-based dating, and constant digital intimacy, it has never been easier for this tactic to work and never harder to see it happening to you. Let us start with the moment it begins, the flood. You meet someone. Within days, sometimes hours, the attention becomes overwhelming. Good morning texts before you are even awake. Long messages explaining how rare you are. Compliments so specific they feel like they were waiting their entire life to say them to you. This is not coincidence. Psychology suggests that early-stage excessive affection works by triggering a flood of dopamine in the brain, the same chemical responsible for craving and reward. Your brain does not distinguish between healthy bonding and manufactured intensity. It only registers pleasure, and pleasure this strong creates attachment fast. In ordinary relationships, trust builds slowly, over time, through shared experience. But love bombing skips that process entirely. It manufactures the feeling of deep trust before any of the real evidence for it exists. Have you ever felt like you had known someone for years, after only knowing them for weeks? That feeling is not always love. Sometimes it is engineering. But this is only the beginning. Because once the flood of affection has done its job, something subtle starts to shift. The same person who once mirrored your every interest begins asking quiet questions. Why do you talk to that friend so much? Why did that comment on your photo? Why do you need so much time away from them? These questions rarely sound aggressive. They are wrapped in the language of love. I just miss you. I just want to understand you better. I just feel closer to you than I have ever felt with anyone. This is where the psychological pattern becomes clearer. Researchers studying manipulative relationship dynamics describe this stage as isolation through affection. The target does not feel controlled. They feel chosen, special, wanted in a way that makes other relationships start to feel less important by comparison. Slowly, the world outside the relationship begins to shrink, not because anyone forced it to, but because the intensity inside the relationship made everything else feel dim in comparison. Most people never notice this happening, because it does not feel like losing your world. It feels like finally finding the one person worth living in. Here is where it gets darker. Once the emotional dependency is established, the affection that once felt unconditional starts to change shape. It becomes conditional. The same warmth that once arrived constantly now arrives only after certain behaviors: compliance, reassurance, apology, loyalty proven again and again. And when those conditions are not met, something even more powerful enters the relationship: withdrawal. The same person who once showered you with affection suddenly goes quiet, distant, cold for reasons that are never quite clear. And in that silence, something strange happens inside your mind. You do not feel relief. You feel desperate to get the warmth back. Psychology suggests this creates what is known as an intermittent reinforcement pattern, similar to the mechanism that makes gambling so addictive. When affection is unpredictable, when you cannot tell if today will bring love or coldness, your brain becomes hooked, not on the person, but on the uncertainty itself. What if the reason you cannot stop thinking about someone is not because the connection is deep? What if it is because your brain is chasing a reward it can no longer predict? This is the part most people never see coming. Because by this stage, you are no longer simply attracted to this person. You are organized around them. Your daily mood depends on their mood. Your sense of self-worth depends on their approval. Decisions you once made independently now pass through an invisible filter. What would they think of this? Researchers describe this as a slow erosion of individual identity within a relationship. It does not happen through one dramatic event. It happens through hundreds of small moments where your preferences are quietly replaced by theirs, where your friendships are slowly deprioritized, where your instincts, the very ones that once warned you when something felt wrong, begin to go silent. And here is the most unsettling part. If you ever do feel that something is wrong, the same intensity that once felt like love can resurface instantly. A grand gesture, an emotional outpouring, an apology so convincing it erases months of doubt in a single conversation. This cycle does not just confuse you. It retrains you. Each time it happens, your brain learns a quiet lesson. The discomfort will pass, and the love will come back bigger than before. So you stop trusting your discomfort. You start trusting the pattern instead. Have you ever stayed in a situation, not because it felt right, but because you were waiting for it to feel like it did at the beginning? That is not patience. That is conditioning. Let us go deeper into why this works so effectively on intelligent, capable people. Because this is not a story about weakness. Psychology research on attachment suggests that the people most vulnerable to this pattern are often the ones with the deepest capacity for connection. People who value loyalty. People who believe in giving others the benefit of the doubt. People who have been taught that love requires patience and forgiveness, no matter the cost. In other words, the very qualities that make someone a good partner are often the same qualities that make them an easier target. This is one of the truths about love bombing. It does not exploit weakness. It exploits hope. And hope, when it has nowhere else to go, becomes one of the most powerful tools of control that exists. What if the version of you that wants to believe the best in people is the exact version being used against you? Now we arrive at the darkest realization of all. Because the most disturbing truth about love bombing is not what it does to your relationships. It is what it does to your perception of love itself. Once someone has experienced this cycle, calm, steady, predictable love can begin to feel boring, suspicious, even unsettling. The nervous system becomes wired to associate love with intensity, unpredictability, and emotional highs and lows. This means that even after the relationship ends, the pattern does not always end with it. Some people find themselves drawn again and again to similar dynamics, not because they enjoy pain, but because healthy connection no longer feels like connection at all. It feels like indifference. This is perhaps the most dangerous outcome of love bombing. It does not just damage one relationship. It can quietly reshape what your nervous system believes love is supposed to feel like. What if the safest relationships in your life are the ones you have been unconsciously avoiding because they don't feel like fireworks? What if calm was never boring? What if calm was simply unfamiliar? So where does this leave you? Awareness will not undo what has already happened. It will not erase old patterns overnight, but it can change the way you interpret the next intense connection that enters your life. Speed is not evidence of destiny. Intensity is not proof of depth. Feeling instantly understood by a stranger is not always a miracle. Sometimes it is simply the first stage of a pattern that has played out the same way for someone else before you. Real connection has room to breathe. It tolerates distance without panic. It survives disagreement without withdrawal. It does not require constant proof because it is not built on uncertainty in the first place. The next time someone makes you feel more seen than anyone ever has, in days rather than months, ask yourself a quiet question before you hand over your trust. Is this love? Or is this a performance designed to feel exactly like it? You cannot always stop the flood when it begins, but you can learn to recognize the shape of the wave before it pulls you under. And once you understand how this pattern works, you will never mistake intensity for love again.